Hi, it's Ileana, and today I am going to talk about the Mars Planetary Corporation Space 3 and the Oxia Palus space for Mars mapping. So recently I had watched the Farsight Institute remote viewing on the U.S. American Secret Space Program in terms of what the Secret Space Program is doing, the U.S. branch of the SSP. There's various factions, and there was one particular base, underground base on Mars, that I think the remote viewers were tapping into. So they had some kind of a mountain range with basically elevator shaft tunnel systems going underground, very deep underground. So there was topography of arid topography, mountains, arid land, and underground structures with a system of underground base system, basically through this elevator shaft in the mountainside. There was huge doors, metallic and non-metallic, like when you enter the mountain in an underground facility. So, but it goes deep underground, and it has different, it's almost like an anthill hive, different rooms, different structures connected to the tunnel, the elevator shaft tunnel. It has, as you go downwards, it has a city, self-sustainable, self-connected city with subway stations, different trains, and moving platforms that deliver the employees, personnel of this underground facility to the different facilities connected to the tunnel system. And this is on Mars, I believe, and also maybe one base on Earth that could be connected to Earth. So basically, Courtney Brown, who is the Farsight Institute coordinator, he is the one that creates all these targets to investigate. So he did a blind target on the Secret Space Program, and he had mentioned a prior remote viewing was done on a base on Mars that Haim Eshed said is jointly run by the U.S. government, military, and with the extraterrestrials, that it's some kind of a Galactic Federation run base on Mars, joint base, and that the government knows about it. So that is Oxia Palus base at coordinates 3717.34 north, 192746.01 west. That's in the Oxia Palus region. And I think that's what one of the focuses was for the remote viewing. I just had a feeling that there's another base nearby, because I am familiar with Mars pretty well. I served in Planetary Corporations on the Mars basis. Planetary Corporations is one of the SSP factions on Mars. It's a military-style run corporation. So I remember it was within the region of Tharsis Montes, near a crater, where some of that scarring is. Interesting type of scarring. Maybe it was a weapons munitions facility before from the extraterrestrials, but now it's a Planetary Corporation, so they build a base on that site. It's not within the crater, it's near the crater, and it's called Planetary Corporation Space 3 at Google Mars location coordinates 357, 31.94 north, 111.09, 46.95 west. And in the crater itself, in Tharsis Montes, there's an underground research facility that probably belongs to the SSP. So I was stationed at Planetary Corporation's Base 3 on Mars. There's also 10 other bases that I was at on Mars. But the proximity to the joint extraterrestrial/human run base, which is Oxia Palus, is actually grayed out airbrushed out on all the maps. Any map you look at, it's brushed out. You can't see the facility. Oxia Palus base, you can't see it. It's grayed out, brushed out, as if somebody doesn't want us seeing what's in this area. So obviously you can pretty easily see the scarring on the left-hand side where Planetary Core Base 3 is. You can see the crater, the double crater in Tharsis Montes pretty well. And bases actually can be built deep underground and in craters. And it's cloaked by electromagnetic shielding protection to make sure the bases are not hit by asteroids, meteorites, and space junk. So the Oxia Palus base, it has a 2 double-domed system on the surface, then goes deep underground because it's an ancient ore and uranium refinery that extraterrestrials had left behind a long time ago, and it's been converted into a research facility deep underground. Planetary Corporation's Base 3 is also underground. So for me, this area felt very familiar. It was like Oxia Palus region. That doesn't seem too far off from Tharsis Montes. So I went in and I had to do a manual mapping of coordinates. And these two bases plus the research facility is located not too far off from the Mars Pathfinder lander USA. So it's these two bases are kind of like, that's in the middle here. So that's in the middle, the Mars Pathfinder lander USA. Then you have various other regions. So if you do the mapping, I had to do it in 4 stages to link up the mapping. So Tharsis Montes is on the left-hand side and Oxia Palus base is on the right-hand side. But the locations are not too far from each other. Like if you were to take a rover, I think it'd be about 2 hours ride maybe on the surface of Mars if you were to take a rover. So it is interesting. So it's kind of like the Viking 1 lander USA. That's not too far from Tharsis Montes either. So the Viking lander and the Mars Pathfinder lander, both US based tech that was literally surveilling Mars and to the groundwork initially to get all these maps and stuff. So it's interesting that these two bases are beside Mars Pathfinder lander and the Viking 1 lander. So this is US tech. So these bases are close to the landers. And I don't think that's a coincidence that this is like this. And this is the full map. There's a lot of craters here. There's a lot of different types of markings. This area is scarred. Right here, that's where that Planetary Core Base 3 is. This is the grayed out zone, airbrushed out, so you can't see the double domes on the surface of Oxia Palus space, but it's there. If you put in the coordinates, you'll see it. So, I mean, you just can't go to Google Maps and type in a address location for these bases. You have to use latitude and longitude to type in on the maps one point at a time, then manually go and map it out equal distance to the terrain to these bases. So from Planetary Corporation Space 3 to Oxia Palus base itself, like these bases plus that Tharsis Montes underground research facility, they're not too far away from each other. This is on the same side of Mars. If you do the map tracking and the ground surveillance, this is on the same side of Mars. You could take a rover and it would be like maximum maybe 2-3 hours between all three facilities. And I don't think that's a coincidence. And again, Courtney Brown had remote viewed a Mars base, but it was never revealed what its name was, and that was like 10 years ago. But we have a name. It's called Oxia Palus base. It's in the Oxia Palus region of the map. That's why it's called Oxia Palus base. I had to give a name to this, so I just marked it as Oxia Palus base, based on the coordinates of this base, because that's the coordinates in the remote viewing, the current one that Courtney Brown's remote viewer team had done. So when I put all three locations in, this is what we get. And I just labeled Mars mapping. So for me, I think this gives some validation and maybe even verification that there's another base on Mars. Not just Oxia Palus base, but that Planetary Corporation Space 3, because the locations of both like these bases in the research facility is in close proximity to each other. Again, there's 10 more Planetary Corp bases that I've been on. When you're talking about being a super soldier or an SSP asset in secret space programs, I remember planetary corporations and lunar space operations being on moon bases as well. And what I had from memory and from the hypnosis sessions, I charted all the locations. I went through Google Mars, through Google Moon, and I put all the locations of where I had been on which bases, both on the moon and Mars. So everything that I have for locations is mapped, and that was already disclosed starting in 2016-17. So that's public knowledge. The fact that these three facilities are in close proximity to each other, again, I don't think that's a coincidence. That might just be giving some proof of where I had been physically, on which planetary corporation basis, for short Planetary Corp. So I think it would be useful for further remote viewing to be done on this Planetary Corporation Space 3 location and Tharsis Montes Underground Research Facility under the crater. Tharsis Montes, I think that needs to be investigated in remote viewing. A blind remote viewing of someone who doesn't know anything about these locations or that it has anything to do with the SSP. So I think Dr. Brown, these other two targets might be good for your SSP remote viewing. I would highly recommend doing remote viewing on Planetary Corporation Space 3 and this Tharsis Montes Underground Research Facility, because it's close to, in proximity to the Oxia Palus space which there was a remote viewing from Farsight on that, and recently another remote viewing that probably shows the same base again popping up on Mars. And I was an active secret space program SSP asset. I don't call myself a super soldier because I was doing work in the underground bases, research work, and cybernetics work. I was not an active soldier, super soldier, actively in the field or fighting. I was in the underground bases or on the surface and in the domed bases in the craters. So for me, these locations seemed like they could be significant. That's why I'm sharing this information. So if any type of remote viewing is done on any of these other two locations in the left-hand side, highly recommend remote viewing that to see what's there, because I think there's a lot of SSP activity happening in those regions. And again, I did this in a quadrant manually, mapping out one part of the map, second part of the map, third part of the map, fourth part of the map, to provide exact details of where everything here is, so everybody could see the proximity of all three locations. And I created clear labels of what everything is and where it is, because I think this is not a coincidence again, and I think it's highly significant for providing further information for future remote viewing. This is the best that I can provide, and I've provided my testimony since 2016, both in videos and books and in mapping these locations. And this is a great find, in my opinion, and I think it just adds to the evidence of potential future remote viewing possibilities from the Farsight team or anybody else that are professional remote viewers who do blind targets. Again, highly recommend checking this out, and even perhaps a remote viewing Oxia Palus base. What's also going on there, if there's any updates on what that joint base with the extraterrestrials and the US SSP, what's going on there. It's very interesting. All three of these facilities are interesting. And what's the underground research facility doing? What's in Planetary Corporation's Base 3? Obviously, they're doing something important to be in such close proximity to each other. There must be something important about this region of Mars for it to have been selected for the two bases in the research facility. I'm not exactly sure what's important about this topography. I was just inside the bases doing the work I was tasked. So for me, it's like I didn't really go and explore the whole surface of Mars. If I ever went out on the surface, it was for specific tasks to retrieve something, pick up something, deliver it back to the base or the bases, and check out all the other bases to make sure that proper work was done on these bases for what the SSP assets were tasked to do, that they were doing. That was part of my job. It wasn't to walk around on the surface of Mars and check out the topography and to see what anything else is beside the base. But since I'm no longer active SSP, I can map this out and see what's what, and kind of study the topography to figure out what's in the proximity of locations. So this seems like important location regions, because why would you have Mars Pathfinder lander USA and the Viking 1 lander USA in such close proximity to each other in these two bases in the research facility? So I think further remote viewing can provide more info on all of this and give us a better idea of what's going on in this region of Mars and why there's two bases there and a research underground facility. More clarification is needed, more information is needed, And this can provide us great knowledge about the secret space programs, specifically the US-run American secret space programs on Mars and even the moon. So thank you so much. I think there could be a lot more information that can come out from this, and I hope the remote viewing is done by somebody who is very reputable and can do good blind remote viewing and tasking, like Farsight or anybody else. Well worth the value, I think, and we'll see what happens.